What's up guys, it's Jonnie Candito of Candito TrainingHQ, and in today's video I'm going to talk about a question that I get very often, and that is when to use a weightlifting belt, or if you should even use one in the first place. I probably should have addressed this a while back because I really get this question very frequently. But anyways, this question really is subjective. It depends on the person who you're asking because a lot of people have different answers for this, and there's really no consensus on this topic either. Because there are benefits to using a lifting belt. It increases intra-abdominal pressure, and for some people this can make the lift safer. However, for some people the opposite may be the case. If they use a belt very often, what can happen is they essentially use it as a crutch. They become dependent on that piece of equipment, and they don't actually develop the ability to brace their core and the core strength to lift the weight without that belt. And what also happens is sometimes it can make up for bad technique. So really, as I said, it comes down to really a subjective opinion on this. And for my take on it, what I would say is for squats, I would just never use a belt in the first place. And the reason why I say this is because once you go to failure, once you're doing a 1 rep max or just doing a 5 rep max on that last rep, what's going to happen is your body is going to go in the strongest position it can possibly be in because you're just trying to do anything to get that weight up. Now, if you have a belt, that position is going to be where you're leaning forward a little bit more than if you didn't have that belt, because now you're relying on that belt to get the weight up. However, if you don't have a belt, what will happen if you do lean too far forward is typically you'll just miss the rep because you're not as strong in that position. It essentially forces you to stay more upright, which I personally recommend for most people because the more upright you are, the less amount of anterior pelvic tilt you need to maintain a somewhat neutral lumbar spine. So that's really the advantage, and it helps more for carryover into athletic competitions if you're trying to say increase your vertical to have more of a quad dominant squat. Another point that's interconnected with this one is that when you squat beltless, what you'll usually see is that not only will the amount of forward lean be reduced, but the bar path will be more precise as well. And the reason for this is because, as I said, you really don't have a great deal of room for error when squatting without a belt. So if you lose that bar forward, what happens is you just miss that rep and you don't train that movement pattern. Whereas if you are using a belt, you'll see some people, they're able to still grind the weight up even if they do lose that bar forward a bit. So this is one of the main reasons why I believe my squat form has become so consistent over the years. Because I didn't use a belt until I was literally squatting 425 at 165 pounds. That's when I started using a belt, and it was specifically for powerlifting competitions. If I never got into powerlifting at all and was just into general strength training, I simply would have never bought a belt, at least not for squatting. Also, another important point for beltless squatting is that you really don't want to become dependent on equipment. Like, let's say you're a football player. If you're a football player, you want to strengthen your entire body and you really want to be able to, let's say, tackle someone. You want to be able to properly brace your core for that tackle and really protect your whole body, protect your lumbar spine by being able to tense up properly. Well, if you're used to using a belt every time you squat, then that really isn't going to transfer as well as if you were squatting without a belt in the first place. Also, I want to throw in my personal anecdote that I've only hurt myself twice when lifting, and it was extremely minor. I'm talking only a week off due to discomfort, but it was my lower back when squatting with a belt. When squatting beltless, I've never come close to hurting my lower back, and I'm fairly confident when I say that I don't think I would have ever tweaked my lower back at all if I always squatted beltless. Okay, so now for deadlifts, I really don't have a strong opinion either way on if you should use a belt or not. And the reason for this is that when it comes to deadlifts, really the back angle is really more fixed. There's not much you can do to have a really upright deadlift. And it's really not intended for that. You're supposed to obviously focus on using your hips, on using your glutes and hip extension. And you really can't be upright because your shins or your knees will get in the way if you do try to do this. So there really isn't going to impact the mechanics of the lift. What I will say is that for some people, it is a bad thing to become too dependent on the belt because then they're able to flex their spine a lot and then they're able to push off their belt to then straighten out. However, what I will say also is that I've seen elite lifters who do not use a belt, who go beltless in the meets, and they tend to have very bad form. And this is just my opinion on what I've seen. So I don't know either way, really. I don't think that it really matters that much as long as you're at least doing a deadlift variation without a belt. So that's how I really approach it. I do stiff-legged deadlifts without a belt, pause deadlifts without a belt, or if I ever do deficit deadlifts, I will never use a belt on those. However, I really have never done a heavy deadlift without a belt. I just do warm-ups without a belt. Another benefit to a belt is not only does it increase the intra-abdominal pressure, but it also can increase spatial awareness, because now you can feel when your lumbar spine is rounding against the belt. So overall, what I would say is that if I were a beginner starting out, what I would do is I would not use a belt on squats, and then I would just try deadlifts for myself and see how my form holds up. And if it does hold up quite well, then I just would never get a belt at all. I think there's no reason to force it if you don't need it, especially starting out. You want to build that strength first and then consider equipment. Alright, that's it guys. Make sure to like the video, support the channel, subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching guys. Peace!